in opposition to these developments through things like public participation as well as submitting appeals, fishing communities' voices are often disregarded when it comes to decision making. At the same time, there is a push for conservation in South Africa through marine protected areas. The conservation protectionist efforts in some cases are violent in approach and aims to separate local fishing communities from nature, as well as restricting their access to their resources. It is important to acknowledge that in South Africa, although there are efforts to conserve South Africa's rich biodiversity, it is deeply connected or rooted to colonialism and apartheid, and historically followed a protectionist approach regarding people as separate from nature and to be kept away from it. Conservation was also associated with protected areas that served a privileged elite and restricted access to natural resources, often involving the forced relocation of Black communities. Now, more recently, in December 2022, 3 local fishers from a coastal community in Dwesatwebe in the Eastern Cape were shot at by rangers for harvesting mussels in the nature reserve. Today, Tobile, who is one of the fishers who were shot at, is unable to walk. In South Africa, advocacy efforts, lobbying, and the use of legal instruments at national level have been undertaken to safeguard the right to food and livelihoods of small-scale fishers. A notable example of this is the Searches seismic court case, as noted in the Special Rapporteur's report. And the Constitutional Court in South Africa ordered an interdict to stop international companies like Searcher, as well as Shell, from conducting seismic blasting in our oceans, as it would have major impacts on the livelihoods of coastal communities around the coastline. In addition, this year, Masifundise will also hold a Fisher People Tribunal that aims to highlight and document the human rights violations experienced by small-scale fishers in the country. Finally, although we see the state as an important actor, these efforts alone are not sufficient. We urge states to prioritize the human rights of small-scale fishers, particularly their right to food, especially in the current global food crisis. We call upon states to prioritize the well-being and needs of local communities over the interests of international corporations and environmental NGOs. Thank you.
Thanks, Jordan. Maybe let's hear from Yasmeen next, especially with the current situation in Palestine and how fishers people are being affected by that and the right to food.
Thank you, Carmen, and thank you everyone for being here. The current situation of fisher people in Palestine is catastrophic. The Israeli occupation's genocidal war on Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, as well as Israeli settler colonialism in all of historic Palestine, deliberately targets Palestinian food systems with the specific aim of the disruption and destruction of all infrastructure for Palestinian self-sustenance. The fishing sector in the Gaza Strip is a vital pillar of not just the economy, but the identity. It is a lifeline for the community. And the Israeli genocidal war has totally decimated it. Before the Israeli genocidal war, there were around 4,000 fisherfolk and 1,800 fishing boats. The sector also supported hundreds of associated jobs, including fish merchants, mechanics, electricians, boat builders, dealers of fishing equipment. These jobs formed a crucial network that sustains families and communities within the Gaza Strip. Beyond just the economic value, the fishing sector plays a pivotal role in ensuring Palestinian food security, and it is an essential source of protein. In 2021, for example, the Gaza Strip produced about 4,660 tons of fish, underlining its significance in the local diet and economy. But beyond the economy, this is not an issue of GDP, it's not an issue of employment and unemployment, this is an issue of livelihood and existence. This is an issue of settler colonialism, imperialism, and the active participation and complicity in these systems. In the past few months, the Israeli occupation has completely destroyed more than 80% of the fishing boats in northern Gaza, and all fishing nets in northern Gaza. Around 100 fishermen were killed, hundreds injured, and this is just those we know of. Almost all fisher people's homes were destroyed. Most have been forcibly displaced. And the Israeli occupation has totally restricted Palestinian entry into the sea. Not only has it targeted the fishing boats, the seaport, the fishing tools, but it also targets Palestinians who are attempting to gather food from the sea, who are trying to find food while facing the Israeli manufactured starvation. Long before the ongoing genocidal war, and since the beginning of the Israeli occupation's blockade in Gaza, it has severely restricted fisher people's access to the sea. The occupation's access restricted areas in Gaza include about 85% of its maritime area, which means that these areas are totally or partially inaccessible to Palestinians. In addition, the Israeli genocide is enacting unimaginable environmental damage to the sea, the land, and the entire ecosystem. But this is not new. Settler colonialism is a climate disaster, and long has been, despite the greenwashing that we see. And within just the first weeks of the war, while the world was distracted, the Israeli occupation gave leases in the Mediterranean Sea off the coast of Gaza for gas exploration. In addition to all states' complicity and active participation in this genocide, we must not forget the corporate interests. It is quite apparent that the international complicity in the ongoing Israeli genocide is also linked to the capitalist interests of global actors and corporations, where financial gain is prioritized over Palestinian lives and the preservation of our environment. As the indigenous people and the stewards of our land, these actors view us as an obstacle to their conquest and their profit. This disaster did not start recently. Settler colonialism is not a new phenomenon. And we have been talking about this for decades and decades. And we will continue to until liberation. And our fisher people will be at the forefront of that liberation. Thank you.
Thanks, Yasmeen. And we stand in solidarity with fisher people and all the people of Gaza. Thank you for being here and bringing this testimony. Let's move to my right, Jones. Please share with us what are the challenges, especially in the context of India and the Asian region, that fisher people are facing.
First of all, on behalf of millions of fisher people, we as WFFP take this opportunity to thank the Special Rapporteur Michael for bringing this historical report on right to food in the context of fisheries and climate change. As the report says, life doesn't start, the life starts with water. The planet, our planet, is 70% of the oxygen comes from the oceans. So the civilization starts in the life of the oceans. But our civilization, the ocean people civilization, this ocean ecology civilization, which starts from the streams of the mountains and ends in the oceans, the civilization of these capture fishers, the fisher peoples in the histories remain untold, unheard. Hence the civilizations, only the human civilization illustrates or it brings more attention to the civilized, those who people cultivate food are civilized, those who are called as civilization, civilized people. But those who still hunt fish, as the report clearly says, we are the capture fishers. From the streams, from the mountains to the rivers, in the brackish waters and in the oceans. We are the indigenous peoples of the nation, of the globe, of the planet. So we are the natives, but what we are been experiencing is really remains as unheard voices, because our narratives in the new liberal world have been smalled as small-scale fisheries. There the problems comes. Fisheries is a resource, it's an aquatic resource. And our narratives have been crippled in the name of small-scale fisheries. Not at all. We are fisher peoples. Fisheries is one of our resources. We are the guardians and the custodians of our land. We have land, we have forest, we have water resources, and we have fisheries resources. And here I say that in the name of blue revolutions, in the initial stages of neoliberalism, in the colonialism, we have been narrated, or we have been pushed, like fishing has been pushed as industry. Fishing is called as industry, but fishing is not industry. Fishing is not occupation. Fishing is identity. And fish is not commodity. Fish is life. Fish is our cultural identity of fisher peoples. So this is how we have been this, as in the report clearly says, this is a long-standing political marginalization and exclusion of fisher peoples, which nobody hears or nobody talks. But this report, as I said, it's an historical report. It came up to bring out our voices. Now, there are certain terminologies post-COVID: blue finance, blue transformations, blue economies. So what are they trying to do in the name of blue transformation, from revolution to transformation? It transforms capture fishes to culture fisheries. It's culturing fish all over the places. It's culturing fishes in the brackish waters, rivers, and also in the oceans. So while culturing fish, they are trying to make fishes as cultured fishes, but these are not the real fishes. These are the fishes, non-fishers, who have been involved in this culture fisheries. So global nations have been pushing for this. Financial institutions are pushing for this culture fisheries, for this cultured world. So there the problem comes. So it is not only the shrimp, it is from the shrimp, seaweed, and everything has been culturing, and it is called as blue food, which has been in the markets now. This not only degrades the entire ecology, it also degrades the fisher people's way of life. It disturbs our way of life. It's make us being listed in the endangered human species of this ecological world. So I take this opportunity to say that we as fisher peoples, we are here to assert and reimagine our resources over the water, the resources over our land and our forest. And it is our indigenous way of life, and it is our identity. Thank you.
Thanks, John, for highlighting the deep connection the fishes have to the resources, and now this is part of our identity as fishers. And also really highlighting something that is also in the report, that really is the concerns that we have when it comes to aquaculture, and especially industrial aquaculture. Now that impacts the livelihoods of fishers and access all over the world, in Asia in particular, but it's really happening all over the world. Let's move to Rehema. Rehema, please do speak a bit for us about also the fresh waters, and now what's happening, especially in Uganda and especially for fisher women. Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll start by telling you that it's such a paradox that fisher people cannot eat fish anymore, either because they can't have it, they can't access it, or if it's there, they cannot afford it. Urban residents now enjoy great access to fish compared to those residing by the lake. Our experience has shown that mere proximity to the resource does not guarantee its use. There are 4 major challenges that I would like to share with you from our context. The first one is there is an increasing push to export fish for economic gains. This has been coupled with the militarization of fisheries to control what has been labeled as illegal fishing. This has had devastating impact to the fishing communities. The second challenge has been allowing the importation of fishing nets that are termed as illegal, taxing them upon entry in the country, and thereafter subsequently banning them in fishing communities after fisher people have bought them using bank loans. This reveals a significant contradiction. The third challenge has been the introduction of aquaculture, particularly cage farming, on the lake. This has been seen as a promising avenue to boost fish production, but as aquaculture operations expand, they often occupy water bodies that are traditionally used by local fishermen and women, This has led to conflicts over the fisheries resources and displacement of communities that are relying on traditional fishing practices. The fourth and the last challenge is the lacustrine protected areas, also referred to as marine protected areas in other contexts. These aim to safeguard aquatic environments, but they have had very negative impacts, especially because they have been implemented in a way that completely marginalizes the local people. The consequences of all these have been severe for everyone, but for women, these have affected them much more. The diminishing fishing space has made life more challenging for women fishers, some of whom are now compelled to exchange sexual favors for fish if they are to keep in the industry. So some communities striving to provide for their families have resorted to illegal tree cutting for charcoal production and firewood selling, often at night. Despite being illegal, the locals argue that wealthy individuals hold licenses for such activities. Therefore, they question the fairness of law enforcement. In summary, forcing local fishing communities away from their livelihoods without presenting alternatives has not only had dire consequences for families relying on natural resources, but also poses a threat to the physical and natural environment. As FIAN in Uganda, we have tried to empower fisher communities to advocate for their right to food through engaging their leaders right from the local level to the national level. I call upon all of us to join efforts to ensure that we save both the resource, but the people also who depend on this resource. Thank you.
Thank you, Rehema. It's clear that the challenges and the violations of human rights that fishers experience might be different in the context, but they are also very similar. And they are also very much connected to the industrialization and further commodification of fishers' resources and natural resources on which fishers depend upon. But now let's hear from Kirill about the perspective of fish workers, workers in the industry, and how they are impacted in terms of the right to food.
Thank you. I represent here the International Union of Food and Agricultural Workers. We're a global federation of trade unions, and our members work in different sectors of the global food system. It was, I would say, few years, relatively not long ago, when we decided that we need to have a special look and focus on the situation of the workers in the seafood industry. And we started to develop a network between the trade union organizations around the world which represent fish workers. These workers are employed in different enterprises. Some of them work in fish processing, some of them in fish distribution, some in fish farming, in aquaculture. And we started with a collection of data and information about the problems which are faced by the workers. We came to a very, very dramatic conclusion that this sector is so highly affected by high level of criminality and very poor labor standards. In terms of human rights, it's probably one of the worst sectors in the global food economy. We found the medieval practices of industrial relations, things like death penalty for not meeting a quota on a fishing vessel, or absence to a very basic level of protection of human rights and labor standards. So this was our conclusion, that we need to expand this work, and we have to increase our efforts in helping the workers in the sector to organize themselves in the organizations and to try to change their situation for better. This was our second finding. We realized in this sector, it's almost impossible. There are so many obstacles which exist in almost in every country for the fish workers to create a trade union organization or to join a trade union organization of their choice. And the level of unionization in this sector is very low. We see it everywhere, in every continent, even in Europe, and even on the north of Europe, where salmon companies, for example, refuse to recognize that salmon workers have the same rights and should have the same access to basic standards such as minimum wage as workers in other sectors. So from our perspective, from the perspective of the workers, the major challenge is lack of the regulation for this sector and appalling conditions of the workers. This is what we are prepared to work with, and this was a contribution from several organizations which belong to our global family, to the special reporter. And we are very happy to be here at this panel with many representatives of different segments of the global fishing sector, to join the forces with everyone, irrespectively of the different approach. We all have the similar concern to share, and this concern is this sector is not developing in a sustainable way, and a lot of effort should be done at the international level to change it. And we are very thankful to UN Special Reporter for bringing the attention to this fact and for collecting all these concerns together and summarizing them in this very useful report, which we hope will become a new tool in constructing of a new system of regulations for the fish workers and fisher people. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirill, for highlighting the challenges and the deep human rights violation the fish workers also face. I think it's important to highlight that oftentimes fish workers are originally from fishing communities, are members of communities that are forced essentially to join the industry because they have no other way to make income, especially as we see the space for access and control and tenure rights of fisher communities reducing over time. Let's move to Michael. Michael, John's already mentioned in WFFP, we look at this report as an historical report. We feel that you have very much centered the points around what is happening in fisheries in relation to right to food, especially in the context of climate change. So could you maybe highlight some of the key findings in the report and maybe also tell us or share with us what is your view about international legal instruments, especially human rights instruments that we have, and how can we use them to advance the right to food for fisher people?
Thank you. Is this okay here? Okay. Great. Thank you. Thank you everyone and for organizing such a great panel. Maybe I'll just give a quick background on how I came to this report. So I want to start with thanking Masifundise. It was a year ago where I was here in Geneva, and they said, do a report. And I sat and listened, and I said, okay, it's that simple. But that's exactly the point of the report. States just need to sit down and listen. All the legal tools are there. All the normative frameworks are there. The fisher folk are organized. The fish workers are organizing. Most importantly, the fisher folk and the fish workers are working in solidarity. This panel expresses that solidarity. And one's identity of one day you're a fish worker, tomorrow you're a fisher is complex. Those distinctions matter. But those, I know solidarity is not easy. But excuse me, but the foundations for change are all there. So the act of listening and learning is actually not difficult. I'm a volunteer, I'm a full-time dad and a full-time professor. This is sort of my third full-time job. I'm not paid. I'm lucky to have an amazing team. But when I sat with Masifundise, the work with my relationship with IUF, and then holding consultations with fisher folk, I live in Oregon in the United States. the indigenous land of the Kalapuya people. There's crab fishing. I learned from the crab fishers of my own community. And I just listened. And if an overworked, tired, middle-aged man like me can learn, then the answers are all there. It can be done. There's also, but what we're fighting against, as we've heard today, is centuries old. The industrialization of our oceans, rivers, and seas and lakes. This is an old struggle. And it was fisher folk that were the first to raise the alarm in the mid-19th century to say, we are overfishing, we being sort of states and industrial fishing. This is over 100 years of warnings from the people that are on the front line before we talked about climate change and the environment and all of that, because they were living it. They carry the knowledge also for the solution. So which is why I framed the report as climate change. Part of it was sort of strategic in the way that I find many discussions of climate change, like many discussions of nature, erase people, make people invisible. These are long struggles that indigenous peoples, peasants, and fisher folk have had to encounter for centuries, where nature is imagined without people. Whereas what I've learned over the years, there is no body of water and there's no body of land that some group of people do not have a long-standing relationship with. And so when these conservation efforts come, these marine protected areas come, and imagine, as we heard, imagine separating people from nature. This is an act of violence. This disruption of a relationship is an act of violence. Maybe, how much more time? Maybe
4 minutes.
4 minutes, great. Let's go against the WTO then.
Sounds good.
So, recently there were the WTO negotiations in, where was it? Abu Dhabi, I believe. And, the trade people are like, oh, the failed negotiations on the fishing agreement and the subsidies. This is a fantastic opportunity, actually. Because in the WTO agreement on fishery subsidies, it establishes a set of discipline on subsidies contributing what a term of art is illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing and overfished stocks. This agreement is not yet in force. They're trying to get more signatories, but it's also interim. It's not completely fleshed out. So it's in play. States must still adopt disciplines. They're trying to figure out what to do with so-called illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. So in Abu Dhabi, this is just March 2nd. Negotiations failed, quote unquote, to finalize the second phase of articulating what it would take to ban harmful fishing subsidies. This WTO agreement prohibits states, or will prohibit states, from granting or maintaining any subsidy to a vessel or operator engaged in illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing or fishing-related activities. What's that mean, illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing? They're shoving three concepts together. They even give it an acronym, IUU, all these ways of abstracting reality. It's not the ocean, it's blue. All right. So illegal. So sometimes national efforts to combat illegal fishing have led to overzealous arrests, the destruction of boats, vessels, nets, homes, shacks, gear, physical assault. And then this notion of unreported and unregulated fishing. I worry because unreported and unregulated is not necessarily illegal. Why are we putting these all in one acronym, one concept? For example, many small-scale fishers work in informal markets, especially women are in informal markets, and their activity could be unfairly caught under this umbrella category. So disciplines against illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing could place a significant burden on developing and least developing countries and on small-scale fishers writ large. So in the report, it's not like I anticipated it wasn't, the negotiations were going to fail, but secretly hoping they would. Because I think this is an entry point for a human rights approach to provide clarity. So the fisher folk and the workers and the developing countries and the least developing countries and maybe richer countries that see the light and listen to people properly, they can come in and say, let us use these existing human rights tools and let us use the knowledge of fisherfolk and workers, and let us bring clarity to these negotiations. If they want an agreement, I think that's the way forward, and I think this is an opportunity. I'm there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. And thanks for highlighting also the WTO negotiations, which is a big concern for fisher people around the world right now. And also talking about human rights instruments that we have at our disposal, coming to Julia from FAO. The small-scale fishery guideline, it's a tool that we have. FAO was really part of developing the tool and adopting it. And I guess my question is, how do we use those tools? And especially what is FAO doing to address some of these challenges, this violation that, and you know, that have come also from what we heard today, and what is FAO role in that? Thanks.
Thank you very much to the World Forum of Fisheries Peoples, and thank you to FIAN International for the invitation to take part of this event. FAO supports numerous activities that contribute to the realization of the right to food in challenging situations shared by the previous speakers, and I'm going to highlight some of the main ones. First and foremost, it's important to recall that FAO has facilitated the adoption by states of two key international instruments that promote the realization of the rights of fishers. One, which is broadened the protection of the right to food and applies to all fishers, the voluntary guidelines, to support the progressive realization of the right to adequate food in the context of national food security, which is completing its 20th anniversary this year. Another, which specifically applies to fishers in the small-scale fisheries sector, as mentioned by Carmen, the voluntary guidelines for securing sustainable small-scale fisheries in the context of food security and poverty eradication, the SSF guidelines, which completes 10th year anniversary this year. It's important to emphasize that the SSF guidelines objectives explicitly include to support the progressive realization of the right to adequate food, and its guiding principles reiterate again the need to support the progressive realization of the right to adequate food. FAO produced materials which clarify the linkages between the SSF guidelines and the right to food guidelines. And you may find some of these materials. We brought some printed copies at the back, available at the back of this room at the entrance. And they're also, of course, available online. Realizing the right to food depends on states and non-state actors to take action, measures for creating the enabling framework for fishers to fully exercise their right to food. And in this respect, the small-scale fisheries guidelines contain detailed recommendations for states and non-state actors to recognize the responsible governance of tenure, ensure fishers have secure, equitable, and socially and culturally appropriate tenure rights to fishery resources, recognize, respect, and protect all forms of legitimate tenure rights. FAO has a dedicated program for the promotion and application of the small-scale fisheries guidelines, which hosts projects by multiple donors toward the improved governance of small-scale fisheries within our global goals of eradicating hunger and poverty while securing sustainable development. Specifically, certain projects, for instance, aimed at developing more sustainable and climate-resilient livelihoods and food systems, and raise awareness about the increasingly recognized importance of eating fish for a nutritious and balanced diet, especially for young people's physical and cognitive development. Realizing the right to food of fishers and dependent communities can be supported through national policies and plans that can further the implementation of the recommendations outlined in the small-scale fisheries guidelines. FAO has supported the development of national plans of action for small-scale fisheries, the NPOA-SSF, which identify the needs, challenges, opportunities, key actors, priorities, and action points for implementing the SSF guidelines. And so far, FAO has supported the development of NPOA's SSF for Tanzania, Namibia, Madagascar, Malawi, and Uganda, and we are currently supporting the development of the NPOA-SSF for the Philippines. FAO has developed also a database called the Right to Food Around the Globe, which is a subset of FAOLEX, which is the main database of FAO containing policy and legal instruments on various matters related to food and agriculture. And in the Right to Food Around the Globe database, you can find legal instruments and constitutions that provide explicitly or implicitly for the protection of the right to food. FAO has also developed a database called Small Scale Fisheries Lex, SSF Lex, which provides an analysis of relevant references and provisions in national policy and legal instruments that support the implementation of the SSF guidelines. FAO has also carried out legal and policy analysis in various countries, including Cabo Verde, Cote d'Ivoire, Senegal, Togo, Madagascar, and Ecuador, to assess the alignment of these frameworks with the small-scale fisheries guidelines. And we are soon in South Africa to conduct a comprehensive legal gap analysis to identify gaps and needs for improving the national fisheries legal framework vis-a-vis the applicable key international standards. To realize the food for small-scale fisheries is crucial to better understand the sector. And I recall here the importance of the Illuminating Hidden Harvest study that was produced by FAO in collaboration with World Fish and Duke University. This study covers 58 countries and highlights key information on the role of small-scale fisheries in the areas of food security and nutrition, sustainable livelihoods, and poverty eradication, among others, which allows for more effective decision-making by policymakers and the empowerment of small-scale fisheries actors in their communities. FAO, in partnership with local stakeholders and national governments, has also facilitated the integration of fish from small-scale fisheries into national school feeding programs. This has been done in Angola, Honduras, and Peru. This initiative not only provides fishers with a stable market, but also contributes to the socioeconomic development of communities and ensure children access to nutritious food. In closing, the right to food and the right to fishers and fish-dependent communities are an intrinsic component of FAO's Blue Transformation Vision and Roadmap, with the ultimate objective of ensuring that fisheries and aquaculture increase their already significant contributions to food security, nutrition, and livelihood support in ways that are sustainable, equitable, and impactful. Thank you.
Thanks, Julia. And I want to emphasize how the small-scale fishery guidelines in particular, they were a result of organized fisher people coming together and participating in a negotiation. More than 4,000 fishers participated in a negotiation of this instrument. So, and yes, thanks to FAO for all the technical support. Okay, we will open for questions now. We have a few minutes before we close. So if there is any question from the floor, please. Please come in.
Thank you and good afternoon. This is really a good opportunity. I'm not able to see the name tag for the person to whom I wish to direct the question. But my name is Ferreira. I'm from the Nation of Jamaica here in Geneva. I do most of my work at the WFFP. I first thought when I heard the reference to the WFFP, especially having just come from Abu Dhabi. So our mind, in terms of the perspective, in terms of the phases, the second phase is not so much on IUU. The second phase is really looking at the harmful subsidies that contribute or may contribute to overfishing and overcapacity. And within the context of those negotiations, Jamaica, at least in a national capacity, as CARICOM, as ACP, really pushed for Article 4, which was the article that referred to small scale and artisanal fishers. Initially, we had a limitation, a geographical limitation of 12 nautical miles, 24 nautical miles. Fantastic opportunity. I'd be very keen on hearing how you would see us negotiators using this as an opportunity for the purposes that we're discussing here. Thank you.
Thank you. Want to see if there is maybe another question? If not, then Michael, I think you can go ahead and reply.
Thank you to the. Oh dear. Well, first, the kind representative from Jamaica clarified and provided more context to the negotiations that are going on at the WTO, emphasizing that the focus at this stage is on harmful subsidies, and that the ACP, amongst other groups, that's me adding amongst other groups, really pushed to reintroduce that language on small-scale fishers, which was in early negotiations, but unfortunately did fall out. Admittedly, I was being slightly facetious when I was saying I was pleased they failed. Obviously, maybe humor isn't my strong point. And then the question was then on sort of asking me to continue elaborating what I meant by an opportunity in light of, and I don't want to use the language of fail. I would say sort of the negotiations are ongoing because my worry is if they are completed but they're bad, that's another version of a failure, right? So I just want to keep that open. One is, I'm not just going to give advice and not do the work, to offer my role and my convening power, right? So my background is in trade and development, and I've been quietly trying to, well, not so quietly, trying to encourage more and more countries to use the right to food explicitly in trade negotiations. There's a lot of institutional and doctrinal leverage there. First of all, within the right to food itself, within the treaty, the International Covenant on Economic and Social Rights, the right to food includes with it a condition of a fair and equitable international trade market. It's there. It was always imagined that you can't create any national food policy without having a trade policy, and that this should be within the realm of the right to food. So, and the right to food is in the constitution of the FAO. So one can have discussions about trade strategy, not just in the institutional context of the WTO. You can have it in Rome, UN Committee on World Food Security, at the FAO. I mean, that's a bold move. But to bring it back to what I can offer, is convene informally, formally, whatever it takes, fisher groups, workers, countries to come together, to have a strategic discussion with other components of civil society, sharing perspectives, sharing strategy, not necessarily coming to agreement, but hearing each other. And maybe if there's enough momentum there, it could lead to agreeing on new strategies, new pressures, new campaigns. A classic move is to have the inside-outside campaign, where if you have organizations and social movements mobilizing, creating new political space, new energy, and those negotiators that are on the inside then can take that energy, use that energy, and keep pushing, because I think it's in many countries and people's interests to have that explicit reference to small-scale fishers present. I think I just want to commend the representative from Jamaica and her colleagues from the ACP for keeping that push going.
Thank you. One last question, and I will ask panelists to be very short, 1 minute, and specifically I'll ask Jones and Rehema and Kirill, and then Michael to close. So in this context that we are now navigating, what is, in your view, one main actions that have to happen to realize the right to food for fisher people? If you could stay in 1 minute. Thanks. Jones, you can start.
Yeah, so we as the guardians of food sovereignty who have been producing and providing the cheap protein to the world, in one word, we are saying that our contribution should be recognized, and we should be recognized as the fisher peoples of the globe. And also, as said in the report, we want to revisit and reject the blue transformations, blue finance policies on conservation, and blue economy agendas that financializing and commodifying our resources. So that can be one step further to advance our rights, realization of rights, providing the fisher peoples as the custodians of the globe. Thank you.
Thanks, Jones. Rehema?
Yeah, thank you. I'll say two things very quickly. The first one, I think if we start to look at fish as food first, then that will make reduce many of these challenges. The second one is if we can look at fisher people as part of the solution, not the problem, and get them actively involved in all these discussions and at the policy level and all the programs that we are designing, I think this will be awesome, because at the moment we are looking at them as the problem. So all programs are designed in a way that we are fighting against the people to keep the resource. I think for me, this is really sad.
Well, in 1 minute, I would focus on a topic, on one topic which was not mentioned here, but is crucial for understanding how we can change the situation. And that is the fact that in the seafood is also the source, not only the source of food, it's also the source of profits. And every day there are new companies are being created and or merged, and we see a rapid consolidation of the seafood businesses. So the sector generates a lot of money, and there is someone at the other end of the supply chain or value chain who is profiting and benefiting from the fact that there are so many human rights violations and so low and poor labor standards in this sector. So I would say what needs to be done urgently is an analysis of who actually profits, and that can create a ground for discussion on how these profits have to be redistributed in order to make sure that fish workers are not starving.
Thanks. So inclusion of fisher voices, addressing the blue economy as a profit-making tool for few instead of all, and especially also in the industry, as Kirill was saying, thinking of fish as food, which indeed is very important, as we often see fishery management to be more focused on conservation and other instruments instead of thinking about fish as part of what we eat. Michael, final remarks from you. Thanks.
Just to thank everyone, to thank the fisher folk and the workers for feeding us, for feeding our communities, for taking care of the ocean, our rivers, our lakes. I think what we've heard today is how strong these communities are, how strong these peoples are, despite exploitation, dispossession, occupation. And the stronger our fisher folk are, and the stronger our fish workers are, the stronger we all are. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. And just I'm going to hand over to Sibyl again for conclusion. Thanks.
I just want to thank everybody for attending our event, and invite you also to have a coffee, tea, sandwich, and ask more questions to the panelists, or don't know if Special Rapporteur is staying for a moment. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I know about the one. Also, I interacted with one of the